Joining us now to round out our lingering question series from Pro Football Focus, it's our old friend Seth Galina. Seth, how you doing, man?
I'm okay. I know you're supposed to come on these podcasts and be like, yo, I'm great, feeling great, looking great.
Not here. Now, you're more than welcome to say that you're not doing great here.
No, I'm good. I broke my finger last week, and I just got a cast this morning. So I'm like, it doesn't hurt or anything. I'm just annoyed to have this unwieldy thing on my hand for 2 weeks or whatever.
You have to tell people how you broke your finger because it's going to give you more credibility as we go about this show.
I broke my finger being an athlete, okay, playing in an adult flag football league.
That's right. So just make sure that everything Seth says, it's couched in his football experience playing flag football.
And I had a chance to make a really good play, and I didn't. And then it broke. So that's where we are.
I've gotten to a point now in my physical fitness journey where I do something pretty much every single day, but I haven't played sports in a good long while. I can't remember the last time I was at a full out run, like a sprint. And if I did it now, I think something would just explode. Like something would just fall off me. My hamstring would just burst into flames. I'm truly afraid to do it now. That's how long it's been.
I would be afraid. You got to go slow. You got to start in like the lower divisions, work your way up, or just play quarterback, pocket passer.
I could do that. I absolutely could do that. I can still throw a football, but that's about all. I have to be stationary. I would be the Jared Goff of an adult flag football league. That's about where we'd be at this stage of my athletic career. We roped you into doing the NFC South. You're the right person for this. You have the right disposition for this. You are or were a New Orleans Saints fan. I'm not sure what you're allowed to say anymore. So you are the right guy to pull into doing a division that I don't think is the sexiest division in the league. I don't think there are a lot of people beating down my door to do the NFC South, but that's why I asked you to do it.
Yeah, well, I heard when you had Steven Ruiz on for his episode, he was like, so because he's the biggest Panthers fan out there. So for you, he was so excited that you didn't give him the NFC South. And I take offense to that. Like, I'm just saying, like, I come in here kind of under boycott premises.
I will say the Panthers are at least interesting to talk about. The answers you get to at the end of the discussion may not be particularly fun if you're a Panthers fan, but the journey is worthwhile. They had the number 1 overall pick last year. There's a lot to dig into. The team that you have followed for your entire life, that's not exactly the set of circumstances we're dealing with.
I think as we talk about these teams, I can get hopeful / excited about 3 of them. And then one of them, well, I guess we'll leave it to when we get there. But.
Well, let's start off with this because I want to talk about your lingering question about the New Orleans Saints. I don't have one, and I don't have one for a specific reason. Earlier this offseason, Saints fans told me, several of them on the internet, that they would prefer I just ignore their team rather than talk about it in a lazy way. I am happy to oblige them. I'm just fine ignoring the Saints here for a little while. So I left the Saints question to you.
Too, man.
And the fact that you landed on what you did independently from you knowing that that's how I was going to approach this is the best possible answer. So what is your lingering question about the 2023 New Orleans Saints?
My question is, has apathy set in for this
bingo
fan base, this franchise? That's kind of where we are now. Now, I will say, like, as a Saints fan, like not living in New Orleans, maybe that helps kind of these feelings of apathy. Like, I think if you're in a city, you can get swept up. I know living in a city with a professional sports team, it helps. You can get swept up and stuff. But for me, it's been, this. You felt excited, last year, okay, new quarterback, whatever. But by this point, it's I don't think they're going to win the Super Bowl. I don't think there's any chance they win the Super Bowl. I think for 2 years we said, okay, well, you know what, this division is not very good, and so they should be in it to win the division both years. And guess what? It didn't happen. So it's like, well, then now I'm like, okay, I'm done. Like I think I'm done. There's pieces that I like, but at the same time, as a whole, I just don't think there's much to be hopeful about, to be honest.
And I think that's where a lot of Saints fans sit right now. So my question for you is you look back at how the last season ended and what they looked like near the end of the year, because they were much more watchable in the second half of the season, especially on offense, than they were in the first half of the year. They were pushing the ball down the field a little bit more. It was at least a tolerable product. So as you look at the way the last month of last season went, as you try to project that forward, what elements of who the Saints were at the end of the 2023 season would maybe push you beyond apathy and kind of restart your heart a little bit?
Okay, so I will say, like, you're right. It did look better. They were pushing the ball down the field. Like, this is things that they have to do because the receiving core is too good to not push the ball downfield. It's too fast to not push the ball down the field. I think a lot of the apathy comes from literally who the quarterback is. Like, that's really the biggest issue I have. Because, like, the defense has played well for, it feels like, 6 straight years, since 2017, basically, they've been elite. It's just and like I said, the receiving core is really good. Alvin Kamara is my favorite player of all time. Like, I like a lot of these people. It's just the quarterback. Like, when you talk about the other quarterbacks in the division, did Bryce Young play well last year? No, but there's hope for him. Is Baker Mayfield up and down? No, but there's hope for him because we just saw a good season out of him. Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins is a good kind of point to jump off from when we talk about Derek Carr, because I think there's similarities there as they went through their journey in this league. However, when I look at the difference in how Kirk Cousins has evolved in the pocket and is willing to take hits and to get the ball off, and you saw it in the quarterback documentary where he's getting hit and he's making these insane screams every time he gets hit. Derek Carr has not gotten there yet. And you've talked about this on your podcast for however many years now, what it means to play quarterback at an elite level in the National Football League is being able to either escape sacks with leg talent, whatever that means, or escape sacks with toughness and being able to sit there and take a shot. Because you're not going to be right about protection. Your players are going to lose one-on-ones. Your receivers aren't going to win when you need them to win all the time. And that's where Kirk Cousins has taken the step the last 3-4 years, maybe 3 years, I would say, to becoming this guy who's, in my opinion, a top 10 quarterback. And Derek Carr hasn't. So maybe you get this last month of the season where he plays at that level and he's doing stuff like that. But I don't know over the course of 17 games, if that's the quarterback that can lead you to the promised land. I mean, given the history, it's not the quarterback that can lead you to the promised land. It's barely the quarterback to take you to the playoffs. So that's where I'm like, okay, yeah, it was good. And again, because there's such good pieces, especially in the receiving core, like I said, you can go on these runs. I just don't think over the course of a season, this is a type of quarterback play style that works in the NFL right now.
I love so much of what you just said, because I think there's so much there. The willingness to stand in the pocket and toughness being a factor in modern quarterback success if you're not mobile. I don't think I've ever articulated it that way, but it's a fantastic point. Because if you're trying to bucket the guys who don't create and aren't play extenders or scramblers or just guys who even move in the pocket very much, who are the guys that can still be the captain of an elite offense and fit that category? I think Kirk Cousins is one of those guys, and I think Jared Goff is one of those guys. And if you're trying to find the through line between them, they can throw the shit out of the ball, first of all. And second of all, they're tough as hell. Yeah. They are, at this stage of their careers, willing to stand in and take hits. And what that does is, we always talk about this, how are you going to make a play that's not really available to you within the normal structure or timing of a play? And if you're willing to sit there for an extra half beat and get your head ripped off and rip the ball over the middle of the field, that's a version of it. It's not the safest version, the best version, but it is a version of it. And I do think those guys fit it in a way that Derek Carr does not. And I think that's a great, great point. And the other thing is, if you're in order to be a guy that is one of these, the way that I've described before is when we're talking about Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, a member of their staff said he's a red quarterback with blue moments. And if you have one of those guys, you can get hot in the playoffs and you can end up getting there with the right things around him. But part of those blue moments is that willingness to make those throws, the ability to make those throws. If you're not going to be that guy that stands in the pocket, you're almost cutting off the chance that you can get hot for 4 games. And so that's why I think that Derek Carr, it's harder to talk yourself into that version of him. But now that rationalization and talking yourself into that, it's almost inconsequential because the rest of the roster is no longer good enough for that hot streak to even matter. And it feels like that's kind of where we've arrived with this team.
Well, I said that I've said like 4 times already how good the receiving core is. I'm trying to avoid talking about the offensive line.
That's the problem, right? The receivers are exciting. What's going on up front is not.
And, they made the mistake with Penning. Like, I think it was this is always the thing when it comes to the draft and like process versus player evaluation and kind of finding that balance. Obviously, they needed to take a tackle. For me, on the player evaluation side, when I watched him, like, I think that was not the right tackle to take. Who am I to say? Like, I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just a random guy, working PFF, whatever. Like, but now you're stuck in a situation where this thing has come unraveled at warp speed. Ryan Ramczyk, I don't know if we'll ever see him play football again, right? Like, I don't know where he is now. Like, I haven't heard anything. I'm not an insider. I don't know this stuff. But, like, the worst case scenario is getting a lot closer to being the scenario, which is that he's not going to play at least in 2024, which is crazy. That means – Fuaga is going to have to be, the guy that's picked in the first round is going to have to be a player right now, which, it's possible. He's a first round pick, but he has to be a player right now. Cesar Ruiz has, I thought there was a breakout. Maybe, I think it was year 3. I thought there was some good play, and that's kind of the 2024 was just not very good. 2023 was not very good. So, you're looking at a left guard spot that's kind of open. Nick Salvieri is maybe the guy. McCoy is good at center. And then I guess you have to go with, probably won't be Penning, but maybe he's Penning at right tackle. I don't know. It's just not, other than McCoy, if Ramczyk isn't there, it's not just like a below average offensive line. It's potentially just a bad offensive line. And then it just plays into this whole situations. I spent a lot of time in this last season talking about Geno Smith and his play style, because it's another guy who is a tough guy, stands in the pocket, is a tough guy, and wins in that way with the toughness and stuff like that. But even he had his issues when those tackles weren't playing. Basically when he had good tackle play, it looked really, really good. And when he had less so tackle play, he had to make a lot more plays himself, and it wasn't as good. And then Derek Carr being in kind of the same boat, it's like, okay, well, these guys need at least something capable on the offensive line, this play style. And Derek Carr's not going to get it this year. He didn't get it last year either, and he's not going to get it this year.
It's a weird team to talk about just because typically with somebody like this, where it's okay, we were kind of on the doorstep of the playoffs last year. Offense was underwhelming. You hire a new offensive coordinator and you go through all the typical steps where you say, all right, what can Clint Kubiak give this group that maybe they didn't have last year? Can they take kind of a step up from there, regain their form on defense, even though they're getting a little bit older? We think Dennis Allen is good at this. Is there a path forward in the NFC South? I almost feel like it's not worth going through those motions with this team because that's not where they are. And I don't think that's where the fan base considers them. I don't think the fan base is talking themselves into that right now. I think they're at a place kind of like you are, where it's like, all right, we're kind of clearing the decks here for the first time. We're not going to move Kamara's money around. We know that we're really trying to get out from under this boulder really for the first time in the last few years, and we're not trying to squeeze everything we can out of this roster. So even everyone around this team that cares about this team is looking forward to 2025 and 2026. So all of that, all right, well, how can they get the most out of this team and this roster while bringing in a new OC? It almost just feels like a waste of time with this group specifically, because I don't even think that's the terms that you should be meeting this group on right now.
But I agree. But then the issue is like, well, then why do this? Why do the Derek Carr thing in the first place? Like,
because at that point, when you did it originally, you could talk yourself into that formula we're talking about, where the rest of the roster is good enough that if he can get hot for the right stretch of time, maybe we can do this. And I understand that rationalization in the moment when they did it, but it feels like that time has come and gone. And now we're in a completely different set of circumstances. And the way that you have to talk about this team and its expectations has vastly changed even in the last 18 months.
Yeah, if that's the case, yeah, I agree with that. And I feel bad for the defense, because the defense has played at a very high level, even with some changes, like guys getting older, not producing as much, Cam Jordan being one of them, a Saints Hall of Famer for sure, but just not the same player he was. And yet they're still able to produce, not really having any pass rush last year and still having an elite pass defense, or a pretty good pass defense. Like this was. And so this is something that I've been wanting to get off my chest a bit about Dennis Allen, because I know a lot of Saints fans are not fans of Dennis Allen. Fine, whatever. No one's a fan of their head coach when they don't win games, right? That's pretty much what happens. But I look at this and I go like, man, this is the guy who gave the Saints, who I guess helped reopen the Saints' late career Drew Brees window, right? When the defense turned it around in 17 and then we're flying for like 18, 19, 20. So clearly a good defensive coordinator, clearly a good coach. His record as a head coach is not good, but he's tied himself to not a great quarterback pretty much all of those years, the same one. Now, is it his fault that he went and tied himself again to the same quarterback who let him down when he was the Raiders head coach? Yeah, that's fair. But I look at it like, man, this guy is clearly a really good coach, undone by really bad quarterback play that I wouldn't say really bad, obviously.
Underwhelming.
Underwhelming, right? That's the Derek Carr story. It's like underwhelming. So that's where I'm like, I understand, again, you don't win enough games. You want your coach fired. That kind of comes with the territory. But at the same time, I'm like, man, this is the guy who's done a lot for this Saints team, for this franchise. And for what he does, which is not touch the offense, he is an elite defensive coach. And I think he probably deserves a chance somewhere. It probably won't happen again, but he probably deserves a chance somewhere where he has at least manageable quarterback play to pair with what's been a really good defense all these years.
So in your mind, what is the ideal way for this to play out? Let's say over the next 2 years, because there are still enough bills to be paid in 2025 that a full-on reset over the next year really can't happen. But there is a chance that it can happen over the next 2 years, where you move on from pretty much everybody on the aging side of the roster. And in 2026, you're set up for pretty much a blank slate of a team, financially, depth chart, everything. In your opinion, is that the right path forward?
Yeah, it's like the accidental tank, which is like, hey, we're in this situation. We're paying a quarterback a lot of money. Like you said, we're paying a lot of people a lot of money, but you get into a situation where the wheels fall off, and you finish with 4 wins, 3 wins, 2 wins, whatever it is. Like I don't think that's possible, because I think they're good enough in enough areas. But that would be the ideal scenario, where it's like, all right, we tried it, it didn't work, and it didn't work in a very bad way, but here's a top 5 pick. And then the next year it's like, okay, well, here's another top 5 pick or something like that. And does it suck to go into a season knowing your favorite football team, the team you want to watch every Sunday, is not going to be good? Yeah, it does. My one comparison is my favorite hockey team is doing a real tank right now, where the city that I live in. And it's like, I'm okay with it. I have hope. Like, they have not won a lot of games. They've picked in the top 5 3 straight years. They have not won a lot of games. But I'm like, oh my God, this guy is young and good. This guy's young and good. This guy's young and good. So I'm hopeful. I mean, the Montreal Canadiens could turn out and be, for the next 20 years, be a bottom dweller. Like, I don't know. but I have hope at least. I have no hope for the Saints to be a Super Bowl contender with this roster right now, the agingness of the roster. So I'm just like, I'm okay with it. So I have to go and watch a different team Sunday at 1 p.m. Like, it's okay. I'll get through this. But I think that's the best case, is the accidental tank, where it's like, yeah, we're looking at a team that's like maybe an 8-win team, maybe a 9-win team, and accidentally we hit only 3 wins. That would be great. Now, look, if they're good, if they're actually good, I would love that too. If they win 12 games, that's great. I don't think that's going to happen.
That seems like more of a remote possibility than the other path. I think I don't even know if you have to go accidental tank route. But for me, the way I see it here, you play out this season, you win, let's call it 6 or 7 games. I think that's probably a realistic place to put them. You go into next year. Now you can start to tear it down a little bit. You move on from Kamara, you move on from some of the aging guys. You have to do the cap gymnastics that you always do, but you don't push money into future years. You just do what's necessary in order to make it functional. And then you can move on from Carr next summer. Could you cut him? If you cut him, it's $50 million in dead money, but he's making $50 million. So you save $30 million in cash if you end up doing that. If you do it post June 1, then obviously you can split it up. You could trade him potentially. Then it's $40 million in dead money pre-June 1. Another team for $30 million may think Derek Carr is their best answer if they're in short of a short-term window. Either way, I think
wherever Dennis Allen is coaching next year in 2 years.
There is absolutely a possibility that $30 million of Derek Carr in 2025 is a reasonable answer for a team out there based on their current timeline and availabilities at quarterback. I can understand arriving there. So you move on from a couple of those guys. You're clearing the decks a little bit. You trot out Spencer Rattler and just say, listen, it doesn't matter this year. We'll see what we have in you. And you do what a lot of other teams have done in that moment, where it's a quiet tank where you can talk the fan base into, and we're just getting information. We're seeing what we have here. Then in 2025, that's when you could win 3, 4, 5 games and potentially set yourself up with a top 3 pick in 2026. I think that is a totally reasonable and probably healthy path forward for this team when you consider how they went about this over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I think this year 4 wins is too low. It's way below the floor.
The defense is too good. The defense has too much talent, and I think that there are still too many good players on the roster.
Yeah, Carr is not the worst quarterback that's ever lived. Like, let's be clear about this. He just doesn't give you that Super Bowl that, like, can't flip the switch and bring you to a Super Bowl. But yeah, the floor is probably 6 wins, which again, like, I'm okay. I'm like legit okay with that. They win 6 games. I'm more than okay with it. Now, you brought up something that may cure the apathy, and that's Spencer Rattler.
So you want Spencer Rattler before week 1, 2025 is what you're saying to me.
I would love that. I would absolutely love it. If there's one player that can cure apathy, it is definitely Spencer Rattler, because he's going to make boneheaded decisions for sure, but he is also going to be wild, right? Like, he is going to make plays. He's a playmaker, right? Like, in the way that Derek Carr is, and he's a playmaker. And I really liked him, to be honest, like, even watching the South Carolina tape. So, like, I'm on board. I was really happy the Saints picked him. Not saying this is a guarantee or anything like that. But again, if you want to cure apathy, to have hope, then a young quarterback, and especially this type of young quarterback, I think is the way to go.
That plus $100 million in cap space in 2026 and a top 5 pick, there are worse collections of resources and assets to talk yourself into if you're a fan of a team that's been hanging around the middle here for a little bit too long. All right.
Go ahead.
No, that was a very good and I think a thoughtful conversation about the state of the New Orleans Saints that I wasn't necessarily expecting to have today, and I'm glad that we were able to do it. Let's move on to the other teams here and get a little bit more into the spirit of this exercise. Let's start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the defending champions of that NFC South. What was your lingering question from 2023 about the Bucs?
For the Bucs, it's so lingering because they didn't do a ton in free agency. So
they really didn't.
Still some lingering questions. And I think my lingering thing is just like, can they rely another year on the aging veterans to be elite players again? Mike Evans and Levante David especially. Vita Vea he's not the oldest player. I think he's still in his 20s. I think he was play his age 29 season this year. So, but still, like, this guy's been in the league for a while. Those three carried them, right? Especially Evans on offense. Like, the rest of this roster is not very good, right? Like, they have two young players that are cornerstone type pieces. That's Wirfs and Winfield. Luke Gedeke played well as a rookie or a second-year player. I don't remember.
Second year,
yeah. So other than that, I mean, this is a roster that was carried by some veterans. Can you do it again? Like, can you just be an elite player in your 30s at receiver, at inside linebacker? I don't know.
I love that you did this, because my question is the other side of this coin, because I was also so interested in the moves they made this offseason, or just the way they approached this offseason, and how that was framed by most of the NFL media. Like, the idea that everyone was celebrating what the Bucs did just because they brought back the 2023 Bucs. I was like, I understand that, right? They won the division, and that it's one of those what else were they supposed to do type things. The Evans deal is at a discount. The Baker contract is fine. I get how they arrived here, but if you're going to be better than you were last year, you need pathways to be better. And I think your question of whether the veterans can still be who they were, my question was, what can we expect from the younger pieces? The Yaya Diabis, the Kalijah Canseys, the Cody Mauks. So we're really asking the same question, but coming at it from two different directions, which is why I love this. So where did you land here? As you looked at the Mike Evanses and the Levante Davids and the Vita Veas, how good do you feel about their ability to sustain the way that they played last year?
I think David... Well, look, they're such good players that, like, you don't want to be like, well, he hit 30 years old, therefore he's going to be bad. But the track records aren't great, especially at receiver. You know, when you look at guys who are playing in their double-digit years, 10th, 11th, 12th year, like, there are not a lot of great examples of guys playing a lot of snaps in their I think Evans is going to his 11th year. They're just
he was drafted in 2014, so this will be year 11.
There are not a lot of examples of this. I pulled this up, actually. There just are not a lot of good examples. So since 2014, player experience, so like guys going into their 11th, guys in their 11th, 12th, 13th, or 14th year, PFF receiving grade over 80, which is where you need your number one receiver to be. 5 guys. Last year we have Keenan Allen, so hopeful for the Bears there. But and
even Keenan Allen was on a downturn before last season. I was worried about what was going to happen with Keenan Allen, because it felt like the arrow was pointed down, and he bounced back in a big way last year. So even that feels like an exception because of the change in trajectory for him.
Yards per route run above 2.0. I think there's 6 guys in this same group. So, like, again, is Mike Evans enough of a freak and a potential Hall of Famer that he can maybe not age at all? Like, maybe, yes, because that's Mike Evans, right? Like, I don't want to say here and he's gonna be terrible, because honestly, I made this mistake with Travis Kelce for a few years. Well, eventually it's gonna fall off, and it kind of, it wasn't great last year. He was still good. So, like, I don't want to say that with elite players that it's automatically gonna fall off. But in the way that this offense worked last year, which was a lot of contested catches on the outside, like, can you do that again? Can you just be like, yeah, this is who we are. We're just going to throw it down the field, and Mike Evans is going to make a play for us every single time. And we're going to be one of the best check down teams in the NFL, or we're going to take a check down an extra 4 yards every time, because that's what they were last year. And for what feels like the millionth year in a row, we're not going to be able to run the ball. Like, I just, that's not sustainable. And I will say one thing about this whole division when we talk about it. We talked about the Saints defense last year. We were talking about the Bucs offense. Like, the Saints defense, for example, did not play a murderer's row of quarterbacks. So I don't know. The stats were good. It's great. I don't know how good they are. The Bucs in this division, I don't know. Like, first of all, this is a division winner that didn't win a lot of games. So I don't know how good they actually are when push comes to shove against like some good defenses on their schedule. I don't know what their schedule is off the top of my head, but so that's the thing when we talk about this division. When you play these teams these four mid teams for your whole schedule. Like, I don't know where it is now. Obviously, they're going to play a first place schedule, being that they're the champions. But so offensively, it's like, is any of this stuff sustainable? You put Godwin on the outside for the first time in his career, and again, he came away with a ton of contested catches. Evans, ton of contested catches. Rashad White making plays in the passing game. Like, I don't know if a lot of this stuff doesn't seem sustainable, especially with the interior of the offensive line being bad. And that's kind of where I am with this offense. And then defensively, David, again, elite player, playing at a position, especially in coverage, where I think you get better with age, understanding route concepts, understanding where the quarterback's going with the football. I think that's the thing where we're realizing with linebackers how tough it is to play coverage as a linebacker, because everything is happening behind your head. And that's like something it takes a lot of time to learn. So Devontae David, probably still a good player. Levita Vea, probably still a good player. But those rookies you're talking about, Kancey, Diaby, Mock, they weren't very good last year. Like, this is a team that played, I believe, the most snaps for rookies last season. Trey Palmer. Those guys did not have good seasons. Now, obviously, they were picked high. They were picked in good spots. We have hope for them. But they didn't come out of the gates like gangbusters. These were a work in progress for those four guys, especially.
Looking at the veterans, going back and watching a couple of games over the last couple of days, Mike Evans was incredible last year. Like, Mike Evans played such good football last year. And it wasn't just contested catch stuff. Like, that's obviously what we're going to go to with Evans and just the way he's built and the skill set that he brings. I thought that him as a separator last year is some of the best work he's ever done in his career. And to do that at 30, that's wild. But it gets to what you're talking about. That's not all physical gifts. That's understanding how to set things up. That's understanding how your body's moving at that stage of your career. And I loved a lot of the stuff that he put on tape. And I'm actually interested in seeing him in this kind of Rams-centric offense on some inbreakers over the middle of the field at this stage of his career. Like, I would bet on him every single time rather than bet against him. And I understand that's dicey to do with somebody who's going to be 31 and has as much mileage on him as he does. The guy's played 154 career games. But based on the way he played last year, I'm not ready to say that the decline is starting to come for Mike Evans. The Levante David thing, I kind of feel similarly. Obviously, he's not the same player he was 5 years ago, but still is reliable enough in the role they're asking him to play. The Vea thing is what worries me a little bit, because he was banged up consistently last year. And there were a couple games I watched in the back half of the season. He missed the game against Atlanta, and I watched the game against Carolina earlier this morning, and he just didn't look right. He just doesn't look like he has the same level of explosion. He's just not the same presence, or wasn't for stretches of last year, that he had been when he's at his best. And those guys who are that big, it can happen fast. And I know that he's not even 30 yet, but of those three, even in 2024, he's actually the one that I would be most worried about being able to regain an elite level, or the type of play that we have seen from him over the last couple of years when he's been at his best.
And that D-line, it's not the same D-line it was like 2 or 3 years ago.
No.
Logan Hall has not really panned out. Like I said, Kancey had a rough first season. Again, still hopeful. The edge, they're not the same.
What makes you say that Kancey had a rough first year? Because going back and watching him, he's kind of what I thought he would be. He's undersized. He gets pushed around in the run game. He's diving into gaps, trying to backdoor stuff. And I think that there was a lack of soundness overall against the run for this team last year, in a way that is kind of surprising, considering who they had been and the reputation they had as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. But I thought that the explosion and some of the pop as a pass rusher, as he gets a little bit stronger, to me, there is a pathway there for him to be a pretty impactful player in the right role.
In the right role. The question is there a such thing as a role for like a DPR interior player? Because like it might be rough, like you said, it might be rough for a while inside. And that, because I agree, you see the flashes, the same stuff we saw at Pitt. Like, there's flashes, and he's obviously a really good, quick player.
It's funny that with
But
him and Mock, they're pretty much what I expected them to be.
yeah,
Like Mock is so light in the pants, like he's not there. He was not there physically,
no.
and you wonder why they couldn't run the ball. It's like, well, you just are totally outmanned on the interior. Like you had no shot. And the guy was a college left tackle at a small school, and then you moved him inside, and he just wasn't there yet physically. So you hope with a little bit more development from both of those guys that they can just hold up a little bit better than we saw them do last year, especially in the run game.
I wanted to make a point, go back to a point you made about Evans on the in-breaking routes. I think where this team had some trouble was when teams would play with too high safeties and kind of, play with less underneath defenders, underneath the zone defenders, and give them more spaces on the interior for those in-breaking routes, instead of just throwing these one-on-ones on the outside. Because again, like I said, they moved Godwin to the outside, always been a slot receiver. He played more snaps than ever on the outside this past season, and just using his skill there. So when you get these one-on-ones, when teams are going to play one high and get those one-on-ones, and then they had a lot of success. And they had a lot less success when teams were playing the too high. And obviously, like with how bad the run game was, you would expect more teams to play that way in lighter boxes. So yeah, like are we going to see this kind of new Baker Mayfield be like, okay, here's this, like you said, Rams, Liam Cohen offense, whatever. Can I hit these high lows over the middle of the field when they play too high? Because I agree, like besides Evans just being an incredible contested catch guy, going up making plays one-on-one, he's just a really good receiver. Like there's no other way to put it. He's just an elite receiver.
He's an unbelievable player. Even with so much exposure to him over the last decade, I turned it on over the last 48 hours and just like, even I forget just how fucking good he is. Like he's just such a good player. No matter what it is, he ran like a little circus route against Carolina where he's working against J.C. Horn, and it's an inside release, and he comes back to the outside and he makes a full outstretched arms catch while toe tapping 25 yards down the field. It's actually a really good throw by Baker. But I watched that happen. It's like a 30-year-old dude against a corner that is 25 and should be, like, based on his profile, one of the best physical in-your-face corners in the league. And he's doing that to him. And he just continues to do that shit this deep into his career. It's absolutely wild.
And that's why I'm like, I say what I say about like receivers in this type of era of their career, but you don't want to say like, well, it's a guarantee he's going to fall off. Like it's a guarantee Tyreek Hill at 33 or 32, whatever he is, going to fall off. Travis Kelce at 36 or whatever is going to fall off. Like they're just too good. They're too smart. You played in the league long enough just to know how to get open at this point, even if you've lost a step. And then Evans, still has the ability to go up and win one-on-ones to go along with, like you're saying about the separation. The other thing that we had kind of talked about with this team is like, Baker Mayfield, like, what is he gonna just be above average again this year? Because I don't think there's a guarantee that happens again. And you saw in the back half of the season that the sack rate started to come up again. We know that's who he is really. So even though at the beginning of the season we didn't see it as much, we know who Baker Mayfield is at this point. And I'll tell you, like, something that really stuck out to me when I watched these guys and watched Baker specifically was they ran a lot of quick game. This is a really like specific thing. They ran a lot of quick game. He did a good job of, okay, my number one concept here to this left side or right side is not open, and I get back my eyes to this like check down route over the ball, and usually Rashad White, who had a bunch of receptions, and it's like, can you just do that again? Can you just like, again, like I mentioned this with the checkdowns before, it's like, can you just like be a good checkdown team? Is that a thing to be a good checkdown team? Like Drew Brees, that's like the only quarterback, or Tom Brady, like those are the only guys who I'm like, okay, this is a thing that's sustainable. They're going to hit the checkdowns when they need to hit the checkdowns, and the checkdowns will be thrown accurately, and the running back or whoever is going to be able to get some yards. I just don't know if that's like a thing that is sustainable one year to another.
I'd love to ask Gino or Baker this, and I probably should at some point. I want to know what sort of voice Dave Canellis was when it came to, all right, these are your outlets. If this isn't here, I need you to get here. Because if you look at, again, the through line between what happened with Geno and what happened with Baker over the last 2 years, both of them were sack eaters. That was Geno's biggest problem for a huge chunk of his career. And then he stopped doing it in 2022. And then Baker, same kind of deal. Him turning into a pumpkin against pressure was such an issue for such a huge part of his career. And last year, he was so much better. And I wonder what sort of influence and what sort of messaging there was from Canellis to both of those guys, because that's the commonality between both of them.
And then we haven't even said, that's the first time we brought up Dave Canellis, like losing your play caller and a guy who clearly is good. I mean, that is a little worrisome with all the stuff we've talked about. Not to say Liam Cohen isn't going to be good. We just don't know, right? He might be better.
Yeah.
This might be the best offensive coordinator we've ever seen, but we just don't know at this point. And they'll do some interesting
looks
stuff.
Like. Yeah. I just wonder what the structure of the offense looks like, because I think one of the reasons that Baker was so successful is they just spread things out for him and let him play point guard. I mean, this is a guy who, think about where he comes from, think about the world that he comes from in college. He goes to Cleveland. He's in this kind of under center play action world that, doesn't necessarily fit him. And there are moments where I actually thought it was good to put him in that box. And then seeing him in Tampa last year, I was like, no. Having him an empty and just letting him go to work and getting the ball out of his hands is absolutely the best way to use him. But now Liam Cohen comes from a place where there have been some stretches with the Rams where there's been a lot of under center play action. Is there kind of pivot away from it? Is that mostly Stafford driven? So if you remove him from the equation, what does this look like? So to me, that's a huge question. But I think if you take everything into account, Cohen, the running game issues last year, this kind of combination of these elite players with these young players, I can talk myself into this. And here's how I'm going to do it. I think there is a chance that we get a version of Baker that was closer to the guy we got in 2023 than we'd had over the past couple seasons. I can believe that page has been turned, or that corner has been turned at least a little bit. The interior, if we do get a little bit more physicality from Mock in year 2, if he puts some weight on, play strength, these things happen in the first couple of years of your career, especially considering his background. You drop Graham Barton. Exactly. You go from tackle to guard. It's not, I don't think you have to tell yourself a story to envision him being better in that role this year. You drop Graham Barton in at center. That's way more physicality than you're typically going to get from that position. So I think that could be a huge improvement for them, even though it's sometimes hard to bet on rookies. So if your run game can go from being 30th to average or slightly below average, even if you're going to take slight downticks in some of the luck-based passing stats. And when I say that, they were like 17th in passing success rate. They were 11th in EPA per play because they were third down monsters. Yeah. I mean, what they were getting away with late in series, that's probably not going to happen again. But if it can all even out and you end up somewhere around league average as an offense, I can envision that. And then on defense, again, same sort of uptick in physicality from a guy like Kancey. And I like Diaby as a piece of a defense. He wasn't a very good pass rusher last year just because he's not refined, but I thought he had some really nice moments against the run, and he plays hard as shit. And him and Kancey, just in terms of attitude and mentality, I actually like those guys and like the overall offering you're giving as a defense, even if they have a little bit of a ways to go. So I do think that there is a world where this team is average or slightly above average on both sides of the ball, and that is firmly enough for them to compete in the NFC South.
In the NFC South, 100%. And I think this whole, with this team, this whole, sustainable versus not sustainable discussion fits so perfectly. Another thing I'll just throw out is red zone. They were woeful in the red zone last year.
Again, why not a little bit better this year? You're a little worse on third down, a little better in the red zone. It all comes out in the wash.
Right. Then exactly. Then you're good. Like you said, if they come down with less contested catches, maybe they're better on in-breaking routes. Maybe they're better on separating. You know what I mean? Maybe Trey Palmer takes a step and they get more of a vertical play from the slot. There's a lot of this weirdness to this team in terms of what they were good. Baker Mayfield in the second half of games was really good in close games. Maybe he won't be this year. Maybe that's the other, you know what I mean? That's kind of a really interesting part of this team where they, in a lot of ways, in a lot of interesting stats that are usually not sustainable, they were either really good or really bad. And it's if they can get to a point where they're in the middle of both of them, then maybe they win the division again.
All right, let's get to our next team here. Let's talk about the Carolina Panthers. What is your lingering question about the 2023 Carolina Panthers? I gave you the easy one here.
What does Bryce Young's year 2 jump look like now that they've upgraded at receiver, O-line, play caller? It wasn't great last year, but
yeah,
but he was a number one overall pick, and we've seen quarterbacks take jumps. I'm curious in what areas, or I have an idea of what areas that needs to take a jump in. So I'm curious if that matches what we see on the field next year.
Where do you think that needs to happen? Like, if you're envisioning the right blueprint for taking him from where he was last year to where he needs to be, what does that look like for you?
I think one of the issues was the guy we thought Bryce Young was, and the guy they clearly thought Bryce Young was to be the number one overall pick, is a guy who escapes pressure and is a smart guy and can throw anywhere over the field. None of those things were true last year. He took, his pressure to sack numbers were woeful. I think it's like
my biggest concern.
Yeah. Woeful. It's like, okay.
The fourth highest rate in the league last year. The fourth highest rate in the NFL last season.
And that's not who the guy was. He was just this little playmaker, Doug Flutie, making all these plays. And that is just not what happened at the NFL level. And obviously, the people who were more concerned going into that draft said that. He's not tall, he's slight, and could be a problem, and was a problem. If he doesn't fix that, forget it. Kind of at this point, forget about it, right? Because that needs to be fixed. So that's the first step. That's number one. Now I don't know how you fix that. To be honest, there's no there's no oh well, we got a better guard, so it'll be better. Robert Hunt will fix that.
I don't know. I think that is the right first step to potentially getting there.
Yes.
Because my issue with watching him last year is that when there was pressure, he folded. His eyes came down so fast, and he didn't have a lot of feel for how to find escape routes within the pocket. And that was one of the selling points for why you could get excited about him coming into the league. His numbers when pressured last year were abysmal. He completed 39% of his passes. The EPA is horrendous. And like you said, the pressure to sack rate was really, really high. I think making him feel even a smidge more comfortable in the pocket and worrying about the integrity of the pocket it's a first step you have to take. And so them spending what they did on guards, it makes total sense when you consider what he needs to be and where he needs to go. And the other part of this is, we just talked about this. Pressure to sack rate, guys who are taking too many of them that don't necessarily have a feel for when that space starts breaking down. Two guys over the last 2 years who used to have that problem and then got significantly better. Their play caller was Dave Canales. Yeah. And that's exactly who is coming to Carolina. And I think that it's easy to talk yourself into, or when you to put it in those terms. All right, well, what's the secret bullshit sauce that gets you there? I do think that even beyond the pressure to sack stuff, the most encouraging thing to me about the Bryce Young, Dave Canales partnership is that I think there are a lot of similarities with Baker Mayfield. The best thing that Bryce Young does is when you put him in the gun and you let him play point guard. And that's exactly what Canales learned about Baker, and he consistently put him in those spots. Baker had 115 empty dropbacks last year. Bryce Young had 65. If the Panthers aren't in the top 5 in the amount of empty that they use this year in giving that guy options and letting the ball come out of his hands quickly, they're doing something wrong. But this isn't, you don't need imagination. And again, you don't need to tell yourself a story to convince yourself that this is the right guy to create that sort of plan for Bryce Young, because we just saw him do it with Baker Mayfield. So I actually do have faith in what the structure of it will look like.
Well, so this was a very, I don't know how to put this diplomatically. It wasn't a very useful offense for Bryce Young, usefully designed, right? Just not just that's the most diplomatic I can say, is not usefully designed. And I think just in general, I mean, this is just a macro point, but we just have a very bad time trying to isolate quarterbacks from their surrounding talent. Like this is all we talk about in the offseason, right? Like when the draft season, like we just can't. We're very bad at it. Not just me and you as like media people, but like GMs, coaches. Like we just are really, really bad at it. So this was abysmal last year. The amount of plays they had that were designed for Adam Thielen was too much for 2023, especially on third down. Way too much.
It's all they had, man. It's like knocked up. It's like he keeps going to the dice. It's all he's got. All they had was Adam Thielen last year.
This was, like you said, not a lot of empty. Not like the RPO game was very basic. And we've seen, like, I've been a proponent of like the NFL kind of being like, hey, maybe we should run these RPO things, like downfield RPOs, or at least first level RPOs, like slants and stuff, more than NFL teams do. And we've seen teams really take off with that. Miami, the Steichen guys, like these guys are really using it, and I don't know why that wasn't a plan last year, but whatever, regardless.
It's a great point to bring up, though. If the Panthers aren't looking at Gardner Minshew tape from last year as a means to help their quarterback, then they are making a mistake, because I think that Steichen, Minshew is even like a depressed version of what Bryce Young is from a skill set perspective, and they got a above average, like 14th in the NFL drop back success rate season out of Gardner Minshew last year. Like that is the right place to look if you are the Panthers coaching staff.
You guys talked about it. You and Derek talked about it when you did the AFC South, but I am in total agreement with both you guys talking about how good Steichen is and how much they were able to squeeze out of Gardner Minshew, which should have been the same thing. And I don't want to bore you with last year's stuff, but like something that when I was researching this, they don't, like, the run game was so not misdirectional. It's like, hey, we're going to go and gun, we're going to run inside zone, and you're going to have to stop it. And teams stopped it because it's a
non-starter now, though. If that's the baseline of your run game, unless you're the Philadelphia Eagles while adding a guy to the numbers, you're fucked. Like you just cannot have that be the basis of your run game in 2023. You can't.
The cheat code play, this is more overarching, not like a specific play, but the cheat code thing to do on offense is that slide action where the tight end, or it doesn't have to be tight end, but someone from the front side of the play at the snap is coming underneath the offensive line to the backside, and you're reading the end, and then if you quarterback keeps the ball, you can toss it out there to the flat route. That's like the cheat code play right now, and they just didn't run all that. And that's what the Colts do. It's what the Dolphins do. It's what the Eagles did, obviously with Steichen, a little bit with Brian Johnson, but like, that's the cheat code play in football right now, is that slide or slice motion. They just didn't run. Anyways, but we're not there anymore, right? We have
But that's Johnson. You can put Leggett on those. Like that's the
whole exactly.
Point.
Like I think
is the having a combination, and rookies are always a crapshoot, right? We never know. But Leggett's skill set, in theory, get him the ball in space, let him do work after the catch. Even if you're down on him, as an idea, that's what he's supposed to be. That plus Deontay Johnson, whose sole superpower in the NFL is getting open and creating separation, dropping those two skill sets, again, even if it's a theory, into this offense is exactly the two types of influences you need based on who you were last year. That combined with bulk at guard. I can get behind everything they did this offseason as a means to unlock the quarterback. Everything.
I'm on board with that. I think finding a receiver, I know could have been anyone, and I would have been excited for whoever they got to play X, basically. But yeah, I agree with Leggett, and Deontay Johnson is a really interesting player. I think most people think he's a good player, but he's played with such bad quarterbacks in his career so far that like it's exciting to think about what he can do if Bryce Young takes that step. I'll add the next step for Bryce Young. The pressure to sack rate is number one with a bullet. One of the things that we've seen young quarterbacks going from year 1 to 2 or year 2 to 3 is the intermediate middle of the field. Can you access that part of the field? And we saw it. I mean, the most famous example almost is Josh Allen year 1 to year 2. Even though he didn't have a great year 2, and we still thought. I mean, I remember watching that tape of year 2, and I was like, "Oh, this guy, no, it's never going to happen with Josh Allen." But one of the sticking points for a lot of people after that year 2 year was he was able to access the middle of the field and throw the ball accurately-ish to the middle of the field, the 10 to 19-yard range. We've seen it with a ton of quarterbacks. Kyler Murray had a blistering start to 2022, I believe, where all of a sudden
I think that's
he
right.
could hit those. Yeah, the MVP when he was like MVP candidate, he could hit
That might have
those
been
plays over
21.
the
I
middle.
can't remember now.
He and
Doesn't
Bryce
matter.
Young, obviously the same height. Like, so you can do that. Like, it doesn't matter how tall you are. You can eventually find a way to access that. He did not do it. He was bad. I mean, he was bad in almost every statistical category, but he was also bad in throwing this area of the field. So it's like, are you able to, okay, you've spent a year, now you have an off season, like you're going to year 2. Like, we've seen quarterbacks take that jump and become real players in this league. And we've seen quarterbacks not take the jump and they stay there forever. And that's the huge question mark, man. That is a huge question mark, because I don't think, we just talked about it with Dave Canales and the Tampa Bay Bucks offense, where so much of it was outside the numbers. You don't have Godwin and Evans. Again, Deontay Johnson's a good player. I'm not trying to knock him, but there has to be some plays where we read linebackers, we read safeties over the middle of the field to create openings, because we're not a one-on-one receiving core. If Bryce can't access that, then I don't know where it's going to be tough going forward.
It wasn't high volume to that area, but it wasn't like he was one of the guys who just doesn't even try. If you look at the numbers, he threw it intermediate middle more like they got comparing him to like Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. It was considerably more than those guys do, which gives me at least a little bit of hope that he's willing to try it, which for someone with his physical profile, that was never going to be a guarantee. So I think there's at least a path forward there. I don't know what to make of him, because there are some throws he made in a couple games outside the numbers, downfield throws where the accuracy is exceptional, like really exceptional. And he's got enough arm to make them. The problem is the arm is still limited. And I just think what he gives you physically provides such little margin for error that it's hard for me to not feel pessimistic about it. Because his pocket presence, if you're going to be built the way that he does, needs to be elite, and you need to play on time all the time. Him disintegrating a little bit and getting uneasy when pressure starts to creep in and drifting and not having a plan for how he's going to move, that's not negotiable. You can't play like that if you're going to have his physical skill set. You can drift in the pocket if you're Jordan Love. That's fine. But if you're Bryce Young, you can't. And that's what worries me, is that when he makes some of those outside the numbers throws, there were a couple against, I think it was Tampa. One was a drop outside the numbers on the right side. He had a whole shot that was right on time, that was beautiful. He had a back shoulder throw to a tight end whose name I don't know. There are moments where I can see what it's supposed to be. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, of what he looks like in the pocket, there's enough to keep me worried that even in better circumstances, I don't know if I can get all the way there where I can just say, if things around him get better, it's going to be fine. There's still enough that's endemic to who he is and the way he played last year that continues to make me worry.
I think that the drifting point, and you bringing up Love, is interesting, because Jordan Love can drift and, do his rotational throw where he's jumping in the air type thing, because he has an arm.
Yeah.
And these guys, like, when you start drifting and you're Bryce Young, because his pressure response seems to be like drifting backwards, or just like it's drifting backwards and then bailing, around the corner, and now you cut off half the field. You better have a strong arm. And even guys with strong arms, that's tough. Like Hurts is like that. He always bails to his throwing side, and he has massive struggles, and he has a much stronger arm than Bryce Young, especially on the run. So if you're going to be a guy that drifts backwards, you better have a strong arm, and he doesn't have that. So it's like you have to be the guy who can find these, like you said, these pockets of space within the confines where you still have the full field to work with, and you can fire the ball from kind of like moving forward, or at least being able to set your feet just for that split second as you're moving forward. Whereas once you bubble around the corner and you don't have the arm, that's worrisome. So
I see a path forward for him. Like, to me, the
yeah,
best case scenario, and this isn't like an interesting insight, but if you put him in a situation like Tua has now with the Dolphins, where if you can just play on time, and I guess Tua ripping in breakers is a little bit different than what you're asking of Bryce Young, but that sort of offense where it's just like, I just need you to play point guard. I just need the ball to come out of your hands in 2 seconds. I still think that the way that his release, just the way he physically is throwing the football, there is something there. But if you give him any sort of crowding of the pocket, if you make things uncomfortable for him, it has looked really bad up to this point. And that's the thing, I agree with you, that needs to get better in a hurry.
I'm just looking something up now. But so Kyler Murray's rookie season 2019, 53.4 passing grade into the intermediate level, 10 to 19 yards. In 2020, so not the MVP year that we're talking about, but in 2020, 75.5. Like, and Josh Allen is one of these guys who improved. Jared Goff is one of these guys who improved. I mean, like that 2016 Rams team, there was room for improvement after that year.
But it's a great 2 guys to point out, because similar to Bryce Young, their circumstances as rookies was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. The play callers for both of those guys specifically, Goff in 16 and Josh Allen in 18, they lasted 1 year, and there were significant additions on both the offensive line and the receiving core for both of those guys. We have seen paths forward for players like this, even if it's hard to get there.
I'm looking at examples. Wentz is a great example, rookie of the year too. Derek Carr is a great example. Like there's examples of these guys like figuring out how to access these really important areas, because they're, to a certain degree, they're more reproducible when you can access the 10 to 19 yard range in terms of value for your team. Throwing the ball deep, I think, is just not something that is really sustainable, like for any quarterback. Like there's no real guy who's like, oh, I am just accurate when I throw the ball 40 yards down the field. No, at that point, it's wide receiver.
It's just Geno. Geno's
just Geno. It's just Geno. So like those are the area where like if you can figure it out, you can just be good at that for the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's still how Jared Goff is making $53 million a year. Exactly. The last stat I wanted to throw out, because I just thought it was remarkable, the Panthers averaged negative 0.37 EPA per dropback on wide receiver and tight end screens last year. Just for reference, if you throw the ball away, the average is like negative 0.74. So every time they ran a wide receiver tight end screen, it was like half of a throwaway.
I bet a lot of those went to Adam Thielen. I don't want to be the anti-Adam Thielen guy, but it's like, because I think now, if you have a Deontay Johnson, if you have an Xavier Legette, like maybe now Thielen can work in this offense. Though again, it's another year under his belt, mid-30s. Like it's tough, but like as the number 1 guy last year, it was not good.
I'm fine with us spending a little bit more time on the Bryce Young conversation and not getting to other Panthers stuff, because that's the only conversation about the Panthers that actually matters. Let's get to the Atlanta Falcons. What is your lingering question from 2023 about the Falcons?
I mean, the lingering question has been the lingering question for
since John Abraham.
Yeah, like 20 years, 30 years. I don't know. Are they ever going to address pass rush? Are they ever going to get a pass rush? That's kind of where I am, because again, like lingering questions. No, they fix the offense to a certain degree, right? With the quarterback play, like that's probably enough. So that's not like a lingering question. I mean, I like a lot of pieces on the defense and the back end. Help that they brought in Jesse Bates and Caden Ellis last year, 2 really good players. AJ Terrell. So like that, it's just like this D-line is just not, it's not good, I guess. They're young in some areas. I really liked Arnold Ebiketie coming out of Penn State, but he hasn't put it all together yet, hopefully. I just like, this is not an interesting pass rush, and that might maybe it's the killer.
I'm going to be fascinated at what this defensive line deployment and rotation looks like, because last year, obviously, Calais Campbell was there for 1 year. It doesn't really matter. But Zach Harrison is a guy that you draft for the Saints defense. He's 6'5", he's 270. Yeah. Like those are the edges that you draft. You're playing the Saints defense, which when Ryan Nielsen was their defensive coordinator, that makes perfect sense. But some of these guys who more fit a Dean P style of defense, an Arnold Ebiketie, some of those more undersized edge guys that they drafted 2 years ago, they didn't really fit. the way that the Saints wanted or the Falcons wanted to play last year. Okay, now we're changing defenses again. We're going to a team that drops their guys a lot, being undersized is okay on the outside. What does that look like now? And then you're dropping in 2 or 3 new bodies along the defensive front. They drafted Ruka Roro in the 2nd round. They drafted Brandon Doros in the 4th round. They drafted Braylon Trice in the 3rd round. So beyond the production and effectiveness of these guys, who actually plays and in what role is one of my biggest questions, if not the biggest question I have about the Falcons this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think they could maybe find some stuff at edge. Again, like now all of a sudden, Ebiketie becomes more of a player like you're talking about, a very interesting player in the defense. Zach Harrison, maybe Braylon Trice, like all these guys are like interesting. The interior, like, is Grady Jarrett a good enough player anymore at his age? Like we talked about a little, we kind of hit on Cam Jordan just a little bit, but Grady Jarrett hasn't been the top player. He got injured last year, but he wasn't having a great season. David Onyemata is getting up there in age as well. Like, are you getting anything from the interior? I think usually guys who are picked higher than the consensus board, and Ruka Roro is one of them, like those guys usually don't pan out. So I don't have a lot of confidence in a lot of what they're doing on the D line. And so like they're gonna have to be interesting, like you said, with their deployment. Dropping people off, coming on different angles, sending the nickel, sending the like all that stuff. I think that's the only way that they're going to have possibly any type of pass rush next season.
It's interesting because Trice and Dorless were both really effective on a per snap basis. I mean, Trice obviously led the college football in pressures. So you have 2 guys who were pretty productive as pass rushers, and Ororo was more of an idea than anything else.
Yeah.
So you drop 1 guy in who's mostly tools and 2 guys in who are mostly production. So
Yeah.
What is the end result of that? I truly
I
have
don't
no
know.
idea. It just seems like they were just taking as many swings as they could in that area of the draft, hoping that on the other side of it, they would come away with a satisfactory answer. That's all I got.
And that's fine. That's
totally fine, by the way. I just don't know what the end result looks like.
I agree with that. I don't know if that's enough. Now, I will say, like, again, we just talked about the Saints defense also not having a pass rush, but being able to still have a pretty good defense. Again, they didn't play the murderer's row of quarterbacks, but this is another team with Bates, with AJ Terrell, with Caden Ellison coverage. Like, they can cover people. And the Saints blueprint last year, again, like there's no more Ryan Nielsen, so there's less of a connection there. But the Saints blueprint last year was we didn't have a pass rush, and we were still really good at holding down the fort on the back end. Really, really good. Can you do that this year without a pass rush? Getting rid of like the difference in not having Jeff Okudah out there. I'm not saying the next guy up, whether it's like Clark Phillips or whatever, is going to be like the best corner we've ever seen, but just not having Jeff Okudah and allow the separation that he allows, that's an upgrade in itself. So I think there's a chance that even without the pass rush, like we can see something of a defense. I'm not saying I believe that's going to happen, but I do think there's this like little tiny sliver of a pathway.
I totally agree with that, because if you look at the way that the Rams played last year, the Rams last year got done in by a decent amount of explosive plays on the back end because their cornerback play last year was actively bad. I mean, it was actively bad. They're dealing with Akel Weatherspoon and Kobe Durant and Darian Kendrick, and it just wasn't good. I mean, they just didn't have good outside corner play. Now you have a team with AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates, and I honestly feel like they're going to come away with workable cornerback play from the group that they're trotting out there. I was in Atlanta 3 weeks ago, and I was talking to a guy on the defensive staff and just flat out asked, I was like, what does that number 2 corner battle look like? Like, is there somebody of an edge going in? Like, how do you see it? And the way it was communicated to me is that it is like a free-for-all with like 5 guys where they're just going to say, who's our best guy? And I honestly think that the way that Clark Phillips played as a rookie and the fact that he could survive on the outside, And the other guy who, when I went back and watched Cardinals tape last year, I was actually really impressed with the way that he was playing was Antonio Hamilton. Like he didn't make money in free agency because he's 31 years old. But if you're just looking for workable play for one season, if you're just trying to fill a gap, you can do worse than the way that he played last year for Arizona. So I do feel like they'll find 5-6 bodies on the back end that can get them through. And if they get to a place where they can have a league average pass rush, because like we talked about, those rolls of the dice, bites at the apple, whatever analogy you want to use, the end result is decent, then I think that this defense could be fine.
So I also really like Antonio Hamilton. And so PFF, as most of your listeners will know, we track all that stuff. We have our grades and all that stuff. We're trotting out of soon-ish our new coverage grades, which for those who don't know, I guess one of the issues with our old coverage grades was they're really target-based. Like you didn't get a grade if you
hard to take a ton out of them.
Right. So these are all data points, no matter whether you were targeted or not, which I think is really exciting. And I have some interesting numbers. And Antonio Hamilton is one of the guys I want to talk about because we have him as the 31st. Last year, we have him as the 31st highest graded in this new coverage grade, advanced coverage grade, the 31st highest graded cornerback in the league last year. And that includes inside guys. So if you take off, like, I know like Mike Hilton's in there and Kyle, not Hamilton is safety, but there's some other nickels in there. So if you take off, let's say 10 nickels, like you're talking about a top 25, top 20.
I thought he played really well last year. Yeah, I really did.
Yeah. He was good. He's a good player. So like that to me is really interesting. I will tell you as we're talking about this, and I just said with Jeff Okudah was 150th ranked corner in this oh
man, don't tell Texans fans that that's the only problem there is that with the Texans depth chart looks like a cornerback. So I'm with you. I do think that it's an intriguing group. I'm actually excited to see what the Falcons defense looks like in terms of schematically the players that they put out there. I do think that they've obviously done some volume shooting at some positions of need in order to find answers, and that's totally fine with me. Mine for the Falcons was essentially, we've discussed this young skill group as just a plus, right? Like, oh man, they have Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson, and you drop Kirk Cousins into that. It's just all systems go. And I wanted to just take a step back and watch those guys at the end of last year. I know that the late season 2023 Falcons weren't anybody's real cup of tea. So just going back and checking out what they actually looked like in practice and whether or not that reputation is justified was mine. Very quickly with Bijan Robinson and Drake London, I was like, all right, I'm done. Those guys are good. Like Bijan's just good. Drake London's just really good. I'm actually super, super excited to watch Drake London in this sort of offense because I think that Drake London on just like a shitload of digs and inbreakers, catching the ball from Kirk Cousins is a recipe for profit. Like I'm actually really looking forward to that. The run game, the Bijan production or lack thereof, I think leads to some larger questions about the Falcons run game that would require more time and study than an exercise like this. Watching 3 games, I don't have a better or more satisfactory answer than it was just a different guy screwing up consistently. Like that really is what it felt like. Because if you look at the structure of the run game, it was still heavily outside zone based and teams were playing them for that. If you look at the way that edges were playing against them and just the width that teams were playing with, they were ready for it in a way that they might not have been in 2022. And the effectiveness on zone runs in general, they were second in the NFL in EPA per attempt on zone runs in 2022. This is according to Sports Info Solutions. They earned 54.93 points on those runs because they ran more of them than anyone else in the league by a ton. No one else in the league had more than 30 points. So the Falcons were 3 touchdowns better on zone runs than any team in football in 2022. Last year, they were one of the worst zone running teams in the league. I still don't really understand it, but I don't think that falls on Bijan Robinson. I think that he is somebody that you can build your backfield and your running game around pretty comfortably and safely for the next several years. And I feel very good about Drake London. So where this ultimately brought me is what is going on with Kyle Pitts And is there a reason to be hopeful moving forward? And go ahead.
Well, no, I just wanted to take it back to the run game. So you're bringing in Zach Robinson, who was with the Rams for a long time. We saw the Rams change from an outside zone team to a duo team. I don't know what the Falcons are going to be, because again, like, I love the idea of Bijan Robinson in outside zone. Bijan Robinson is good. So like, I kind of like him in whatever offense you can put him in, because he's that good. But I also love the idea of him with those like sudden jump cuts in a duo run where he's cramming up the middle and he's going to jump it like Le'Veon Bell back in the day. So I'm very interested in, like, do they go away from, like, where is Zach Robinson's head after spending all that time and seeing the evolution of that offense with the Rams? Now he comes here. Is it a continuation of where the Rams left off? Or is it, okay, no, this is actually like, yes, they weren't good at outside zone last year. However, I believe in my system, it'll work better. And Bijan works. Like, I don't know the answer, obviously. I'm very curious to see where they are with how they run this ground attack.
It's really interesting because if you look at the way their offensive line is built, they're undersized, right? Like, Lindstrom can do anything. Lindstrom's a monster. I don't think he played up to standard last year, but Chris Lindstrom is a very good player and has the physical profile to do anything you'll ask of him. But Dahlman at center is undersized, and Bergeron's a little bit light in the pants for a guard. Like, his selling point moving inside to guard in his first year was he has the movement skills to be effective in a zone-based running scheme. So the fact that those are still your pieces, and Jake Matthews has never been a mauler, McGarry is a better fit in that system. I honestly think that if I were looking for what is the 2.0 extension off of a zone running game, I would look at what the Niners have done more than I would look at what the Rams have done, because I think the skill sets of the offensive line and the way the offensive line is built is actually closer to what you're getting in San Francisco with some of those lighter bodies than it is to what the Rams pivoted to last year.
That would be my idea. Like, I think they will end up going back to that outside zone. And again, it's something that Kirk is used to. Like, you're getting Kirk Cousins, who just played in a quote unquote Rams type system. So like, I think that's fair enough. And yeah, like the Pitts thing, I don't really have an answer. So I agree with you. Bijan, great player. London, I think we'll bounce back. Pitts, I think I'm still pretty bullish on Kyle Pitts. I think that there's a way forward for him. I think, like, you want to look at it and say, like, okay, like, look what happened when TJ Hawkinson and Kirk went, paired up together. And like, but I'm like, that's two different players. I think there's a lot of underneath stuff that he ended up hitting Hawkinson on, which is not like plays designed for Hawkinson. Where it's like with Pitts, it's like, man, you are designing plays for Kyle Pitts. Can he get open on these plays? I still think so. And it'll look better with the best quarterback that he's played since the rookie season, obviously with Matt Ryan. So I'm still bullish on him. But yeah, that is like kind of where are we getting a real Kyle Pitts? Because if we get the Pitts that we've kind of seen the last 2 years, or the production, I should say, is London good enough going into year 3 to be a wide receiver 1? I want to say yes, because I really like him, but I'm not quite sure.
I think he is. I think especially in this sort of offense, and I think his skill set fits this sort of offense perfectly. I do. I mean, having him in more condensed sets, having him work over the middle of the field more than he did, because we conceive of an Arthur Smith offense as this middle of the field, just over and over and over again, hammering that home. If you look at the percentage of Drake London's routes that were in cuts compared to the Puka Nakuas, the Jordan Addisons, guys that were in this style of offense, it's half. It's not there. And I think if you crank that up, we're going to see the best version that we have of Drake London. And that's before you even get to, I think he can run some, like the Cooper Kupp option route shit. Like, I do think he has that in his bag. And for the most part, he's just been an X in this offense. The Kyle Pitts thing for me, I understand how we arrived at the Kyle Pitts usage over the last couple of years. One, you have no speed within your offense. Kyle Pitts is the most explosive receiver that the Atlanta Falcons had over the last couple of years when Scotty Miller was not on the field. He was their most explosive full-time receiver. So what they did with him is they made him a vertical player. Last year, he ran combined 160 post goes and corners. No other tight end in the league was over like 125, right? So he was the most vertical based tight end in football. And I get it. He's 6'5". He's the most explosive player that you have. Watching him stride it out in practice, I'm sure it looks beautiful. I would throw 95% of that shit in the garbage can because I don't think he's good at it. I don't think that's what he's actually good at. Him on benders, him working over the middle of the field, him finding space against zone on corner routes from the slot, like that's where I actually think he's best. And what's so encouraging about this is that in this offense, that's how they'll use him. Like I would look at the ways that Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and even like Sam Laporta have been used over the last couple of years. And I would try to piece together the Kyle Pitts role out of those sort of ideas rather than miscasting him as an outside the numbers vertical presence, even if it's tempting to do that because of what he looks like and the way that he moves.
So it's funny because when you said Drake London should get a lot of the Kupp routes, which I agree with, man, what about Kyle Pitts getting the option routes? Like, what about
he can do it? He can absolutely do it.
100%. And like the bigger because he's a bigger body, you don't need to get that insane separation that those guys gets on that, like the Kupp in his prime was getting on those routes. You just need a step, and then the big body will take care of the rest. So I think it's really interesting to have a mix, like you said, a mix of all these guys, Nacua and Laporta and Kupp, because I think he's capable of being that kind of quick in and out of his break type of player over the middle of the field on those option routes. And I think that could help unlock him in a level that we thought was going to be possible after year one. And I still believe it's possible. I don't think that there's I don't think it's that concerning that with Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder that it didn't qualified by the usage that you're talking about, why it didn't work out. Like it makes sense why it didn't work out.
The usage is just, I understand again how you get there, but it is frustrating. And I just don't think he's that type of guy. He averaged 0.8 yards per route run when lined up wide last year. He caught 12 of his 30 targets. The EPA per play was like bottom 5 among all tight ends. If in the slot, he was 6th in yards per route run among all tight ends last year. He was a really effective player. Go watch it. Go watch him run some of those corner routes from the slot. Watch him on high lows working over the middle of the field. He's good at that stuff. And that's the best part about this is that you don't have to play outside of the structure of your offense to utilize him that way. That's how this offense is built. So for him and London, I actually think that there is a real path to us seeing something close to the best versions of themselves, because I think their skill sets and the way this thing is built align kind of beautifully if used the right way.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge Darnell Mooney fan, but it gives you something on the outside. Like there's something. At least
you get a stretcher, right? Like so Kyle Pitts no longer has to do that. That's why I think it's okay. My concern is, are we lining Darnell Mooney up on the outside as a vertical stretch player? Because I want to see Pitts inside and I want to see London closer to the formation, but I don't think that Darnell Mooney is like an outside the numbers on the ball sort of player. No. So I don't know exactly how it all fits together, but I do think that there is a version of it that I can get mildly excited about.
I think your best bet is, as much as I love the idea of London playing a bunch of different roles, I do think he's your best kind of on the ball
agreed
type of receiver on the outside. So that might be by default what you end up having to do, because he can be physical.
But on the ball receivers in this offense still run a ton of in-breaking routes.
Yes,
because as an on the ball player, that's fine. So again, I think you're right there, but this offense deploys those on the ball X receivers in a different way than most offenses do.
Yeah, it's just like the ability to say, okay, we're going to play on the ball and you can get off press, but you're not going to be lined up on a sideline. You're going to be lined up next to the tackle. You're just the most outer player under this offense.
And again, I think that these guys, that type of offense really does complement the players they should be and the players that I think they can be. So I understand there's been a drumbeat of optimism about what the Falcons offense could be with Kirk Cousins and these pieces. I actually think a lot of that is justified after going back and kind of rethinking and reconceiving of this.
I also really like Kirk Cousins. He's a really good quarterback. That's the other thing. These guys don't come come available in free agency very often, like a quarterback at this level. Obviously coming off the injury, I get it, but like this is a really, really good quarterback at this point in his career. So I'm excited for this offense.
All right. That is all we got for the NFC South. For this being our last show and for this being the division that I think most people would shit on the most, I actually had a very good time doing that. That was very enjoyable. I appreciate you joining me for it.
Very cathartic experience to get the Saints woes off my chest to start this thing off. I'm gonna have a great.
I'm so glad you were here for that because it provides so much covering fire for me and that entire conversation. The fact that I could couch it in, he's a Saints fan, I promise. It's beautiful. That's what I was really doing. I was using you for that one specific reason.
Look, I'm here for you. Anytime you need me as buffer for Saints fans, I'm here.
I appreciate it, buddy. All right, guys, that is all we got. Sincerely appreciate everyone who joined us for this. It's a pretty meaty off-season slate of shows to do. And for all of these guests who aren't employed by the company where I work to take the time to do this with me, just a blanket thank you to all of them, because it's too much homework to assign a podcast guest in June, but everyone was game, and that means a lot to me. So thank you truly to all 8 guests who did these shows with us over the last couple months. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, doing our next installment of the supporting cast rankings. We're going to do the NFC tomorrow with our buddy Mike Clay from ESPN. Mike does a really good job of just conceiving of how units are built in the offseason and thinking about it that way. I thought he was the perfect guest for an exercise like this. So very excited to talk to Mike about the supporting cast in the NFC. Just to get ahead of this a little bit, we are only going to have one show next week. Next week, this is the 4th of July. We're going to have a show on Tuesday, and then we're going to take a break for the rest of the week. We'll be back the following week, normally scheduled programming, all of that stuff, but just wanted to let you guys know that we're going to give you a little bit of time off, and we're going to take a little bit of time off as we head into the 4th of July weekend. But we'll be back with the show tomorrow. Until then, appreciate all of you listening. We'll talk to you soon.